Prabhuji walks us through a journey in the concept of shunyata, in understanding what shunyata means, the Buddhist term, in which we started from the understanding that emptiness is in fact presence, is existing, it is significant, and it is also a source of power and beauty in our lives. Then in the second class we went through the understanding that all the items, all the entities, all the names and forms that we see in front of our eyes constantly all throughout our lives, in fact do not exist in their essence. If we break them down, we realize that they are names and forms, but the names of the forms live not in the objective world as essence, but in our thinking, and that the only reality that we have direct access to is consciousness, is the awareness itself. Except for awareness, which is the field on which appear all these object entities, nothing exists ultimately. Everything comes and goes, arise and disappear in time, in space, but nothing exists substantially and ultimately. And the third step in this journey, and the last one, today we're going to conclude this article, is the inevitable understanding that the same truth is also relevant to us. So not only when we look outward at the world, we cannot find anything substantial if we examine it carefully with intellectual clarity, but also if we turn the look inward and try to recognize something substantial in ourselves, we will not find anything except a name, a form, occurrences, characteristics, events, memories, aspirations, sensual perceptions, perceptions of the senses, ideas and thoughts. All this that we just described do not exist in us, but in our mind. It's our interpretation of all the experiences that are that arise in the field of consciousness. Again, the only direct experience that we have is of consciousness. We are aware. This is the only reality that we can testify directly without any mediator, which means it's not a reality that we know from others, it's not a reality that we remember, it's not a reality that we understand. It's independent of time, it's independent of place, it's independent of our mind and thinking, it's independent of the perception of the senses. We directly know that we are aware. Each and every person have direct access, and this tells us Prabhuji, the retroprogressive path, and the Buddha is the only reality of ourselves. In other words, we do not exist. So again, we understand emptiness is existing. We then understood the world does not exist, and now we understand we do not exist, which is a point that we encountered again and again in Prabhuji's content and the retroprogressive message. And now yet again, through this language of Buddhism, we contemplate through Prabhuji's words on this reality that we do not exist as a substantial entity, ultimate. We appeared at a certain point, we will disappear at a different point in time. We are a combination of different events, memories, ideas, thoughts, experiences, perceptions, but not more than this. The only reality that we are, the Buddha will tell us, is shunyata. We are nothing. Prabhuji will tell us consciousness. And consciousness, we can say in other words, means nothing exists in essence. And when we say nothing exists in the language of Buddhism, we refer to anything that we can perceive, anything that we can name, anything that we can understand. All these do not exist. And this understanding might be not impossible throughout our intellect. It is possible, but to go through the conscientization, which means to really be established in this knowing, it's typically not a simple process. It's typically a long process, evidently, if we look at examples. And this is the process of self-realization that the Buddha spoke about, and other great individuals, masters, realized beings told us about. And this is the essence of all the retroprogressive path. The self-realization, the discovery that our current perception of reality is not reflecting an ultimate and substantial reality, but mental ideas. We are isolating the mental ideas one by one, together with Prabhuji in all his talks and lectures. And of course, this article is another great opportunity. So now Prabhuji sheds light on this fact that, in my humble opinion, in order to go with Prabhuji through this process and reflect on this word, the best conditions to allow it is that we will really want to realize the truth that he's talking about. And this may seem to us very lofty, even grandiose, even arrogant. We would like to realize ourselves similarly to the realization of the Buddha. We're just ordinary human beings. We have different occupations and different situations in life, etc. We are maybe too old or too young or too mental, or we perceive ourselves as being very superficial, or whatever it may be. It's hard for us to imagine that this is really speaking about us, that we really are in the same or have the same access to the Buddhic nature that the Buddha talked about, and this is what the Buddha told us. But Buddhism tells us just this. Prabhuji gave a talk recently about the Heart Sutra, and he spoke about the fact that the important understanding in the Mahayana Buddhism that each and every one of us is the Buddha. In essence, we are the Buddhic nature. It's not a poetic idea. It's not a metaphor. It is the reality. This is the message. This is what Buddhism tells us. And this is what Prabhuji tells us again and again in all the contents of his message. And I think that when we embrace this understanding and sincerely desiring to discover it, at least this moment that we are listening to the lecture or reading the article, then we set the ultimate conditions, the best conditions to open to the words that are delivered to us and connect with them, with the truth on which Prabhuji talks to us about, that is our own truth. A person seems to us a uniform unit. However, a body is nothing more than interaction of cells, organs, bones, and flesh made of substances that constantly change. It is not the same as it was yesterday or will be tomorrow. Likewise, the mind is a continuous flow of ideas and feelings that unceasingly change. In fact, this someone exists only in the outer wrapping, in the clothing. Although we constantly change, we believe we have the same identity throughout our lives. However, it is impossible for us to identify exactly what we call I, because this egoistic concept belongs to the surface. Our inner reality is not solid, but just a presence. We are born, live, and disappear in the infinite space of consciousness. Just as the movement of the waves does not affect the depths of the sea, our actions, words, and thoughts do not influence our imperturbable emptiness. All dynamism occurs on the surface, that is, at a physical, mental, and emotional level. Our actions, whether mundane or spiritual, neither degrade nor purify the inner emptiness. We live, of course, with a very strong identification, feeling, perception that we exist as entities. Of course, I exist as an individual. This and this age and name and occupation and etc. Relationships. Of course, this entity exists. And whether we accept to some extent the Eastern view that tells us we do not exist, and not only Eastern, but Eastern, it's very clear and communicated very well, we do not exist, or we do not accept it at all, either we accept it or do not accept it, still this conviction is very present in our experiences as individuals. And if we wish to break it down to pave our path to possibly one day realize that actually we are consciousness, we must start by sincerely asking this question, which may seem so simple, which may seem so easy to answer, but it only seems easy to answer if we didn't ask it seriously and sincerely, which is who we are, or what we are, or where we are. Where is this entity? What is it made of? To start and realize how much it is impossible to answer with words, with explanation, we need to really ask. And this is a question not every human being has the grace, you can say, even to ask this question. Many of us go throughout this life without never asking, just living and assuming and accepting. But those of us who pause to ask are often struggling with the difficulty to not being able to answer and yet keep identifying. We're trapped in between because, of course, we are identified with this entity. To go through the establishment of the truth that we are shunyata, that we are consciousness, that we are transcendental to this experience of us as human beings. As we said, again, it's not something that happened frequently. And yet, we can easily starting to shaken the strong mental conviction that we have that we are these entities. And then we are starting this journey, this beautiful journey of self-discovery. But the question is very significant. And as we ask this question, again, we will see how easily our convictions turn into confusion. We cannot perceive anything. We do not understand who we are or what we are. And again, this is the beginning of the journey. I think I shared already that when in the beginning of my journey, my own journey, I was asked who you are. And I didn't even think that I do not know. So I jumped and just presented my name, which was a very superficial reply. But of course, this was representative of what many of us human beings would imagine that we are. Even though we might not be completely unintelligent or immature, we are mature human beings. We know quite a lot, we understand quite a lot, but we don't really know. And we think that we know. So, this is an important reflection on this journey. And Prabhuji takes us through this experience that I think we already presented a few times. that if we try to isolate ourselves from all the words, from whatever we understood, either from the word that convinced us that we exist or from realized beings who tell us we do not exist, and try to check ourselves, we can embrace the experiment that Prabhuji suggests to us in this discovery, which is this moment. Just stop and try to recognize what can we testify about that is not memories or knowledge or ideas that we learn from others. What is our own experience? And the 4 elements that we are going to come across will be thoughts that come and go. We can testify that we think. We directly know that we think. We recognize that we think. We will recognize emotions. All of us are well familiar with an array of emotions that happen to us. Evidently, we can testify. We can testify about sensations, physical sensations that we sense if we just close our eyes, yes, for sure. And perception of the senses. We see, we hear, we smell, we touch, etc. And we receive all these sensory messages throughout the senses. Through the senses. But these are the only elements that we can testify about, which means we cannot testify that any entity exists. Any entity, we spoke about it in the previous class, that we will point to, we can speak about it, we can refer to it, we can describe it, we can present knowledge about it, but we cannot prove its existence. It's elements that are put together, combination that live in our mental faculties, in our thinking, in our mind. But we cannot prove anything other than what we listed. And what we listed, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions, are also not something that we can testify about their validity directly, which means they are not objects that we can prove. We know that they happen to us. But what we have direct access to is even not the thoughts, feelings, sensations, or perceptions, but just consciousness itself, on which they occur. Consciousness is our direct experience. We can close our eyes in any time, in any place, unrelated to any situation, unrelated to any narratives that we have, unrelated to any emotional state that we have, and we are conscious. We experience the awareness directly. A sacred action decorates the outer walls of a building. A profane one stains them. However, both decorations and stains remain on the exterior, while the interior is undisturbed. This absolute emptiness, where everything happens, remains untouchable. We are also not our actions, Prabhuji tells us. Everything that we did, many of which we consider good, many of which we consider bad, many of which we consider great, wonderful, glorious, many of which we consider shameful, things we regret about, etc. All of these are just decorations, are just walls that can be beautiful or can be stained, but they are not our reality. They do not define us. And these are good and bad news. We are not as terrible as we think. We are not as wonderful as we think, because we are nothing. None of the things that we attribute to ourselves is really related to our essence, to who we really are. We are independent of all our actions. And this, of course, relates both to all the past actions that we took, that we have so much judgment about, again, good or bad, and all the future choices that we may make, all the actions we are going to decide to do. what things to do, what things to avoid, what path to take, what profession to study, etc., etc., etc. So many decisions all throughout our lives. Every day we take so many decisions regarding how to act. All this will never define us. We will always be free of it and independent and existing outside of all these actions. All the meaning of our life, we can say, is vanished now. If all these actions are not us, are not defining us, where can we find meaning to our life? We spoke about this risk in previous classes, but what actually Prabhuji tells us here is that these actions do not define who we are ultimately, in essence, as all this lifetime do not define. This lifetime is an episode in our infinite existence, eternal existence from ever to ever, as this space we always were and always will be. But this is a temporary experience in time and place, and the meaning is relevant to this lifetime. We said this message is not practical, to know that we are nothing and nothing matters, and we never was and never will be as entities. What can we possibly do about it? Nothing. But the religions do not underestimate this experience in this lifetime, this temporary experience episode in time and place, but on the contrary, they emphasize its importance. Because we are empty, we have this freedom to choose, and our choices are extremely significant. How come they are significant? We said they do not define us. They are significant in this lifetime. They define our temporary experience that we can pave and choose. We spoke about this point of us being empty of essence, also in relation to Western philosophy of existentialist philosophers who told us we do not have any predestined existence and goal. There is nothing that we are supposed to fulfill because we are just emptiness. We do not exist as essence. But we have the freedom to make choices. And although we are free, ultimately, we are not free in this lifetime, which means the clock is ticking and our years do go by, and our choices will pave the way we live in this temporary experience. So we learn both in all religions, again, and both are extremely significant. This temporary experience in time and space is significant for this experience in time and space, for us as entities, as long as we are on this beautiful planet. But our ultimate reality is tremendously significant for us to realize, to recognize, to be in ultimately, because this is who we are. We are not comfortable in our temporary existence because this is not our real home, our ultimate reality. This is temporary appearance. But our access to our real reality can make our temporary experience even more beautiful, meaningful, significant. We are more established in reality. And I believe that the point that Prabhuji leads us to here is that although our actions may not be insignificant, and we do want to beautify our lives and be mindful about the way we pave our path and consider the law of cause and effect, and consider our image even, we must understand that this is not the most significant aspect of our lives. And if we base all our existence on the walls, on the exterior, on the decorations, we are again not living our reality. And we are keeping ourselves trapped in the image, in the superficial. If we remember what happened to Emperor Wu, when he met the Bodhidharma was established in reality, in truth. Not easy truth, not easy for Emperor Wu to embrace. But he introduced Emperor Wu with his very reality when he told him that all his actions, what he considered merit, what he considered good deeds, what he considered great Buddhist regulations are nothing. That Emperor Wu is empty-handed. Emperor Wu asked Bodhidharma, what is my merit? I did so many things. I helped monks and built temples, etc., 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 etc. Bodhidharma told him, you have no merit. This is not yours. This is insignificant. This has nothing to do with you. These are external occurrences. And this may seem harsh, difficult, but he helped Emperor Wu to be more established in the truth and in the reality. Because when we think that we are so great because of certain things that we do, we are enslaving ourselves by these perceptions and keeping ourselves away from the reality. Because these are fragile imaginations that come and go. It's not who we are. It's not what will be left with us forever. So the understanding that the actions are not really us is an understanding that freeing us, both from the bad and also from the good actions that we attribute to ourselves. In the course of our lives, the word I is undoubtedly the one we use the most. In classical thinking, I corresponds to the soul or the subject who speaks, but nobody has yet managed to locate it. In fact, there is no such thing as autonomous I. We are part of an omnipresent, infinite I. The egoic phenomenon consists in considering ourselves a separate entity. However, our existence is not independent in any way. Physically, we depend on water, air, food, and sleep. Our life depends on that of our ancestors as well as flowers, trees, stars, and the planet. When we think we are separate entities, we limit and minimize ourselves. The problem stems from the way we have been programmed to perceive the world around us. Our senses divide reality into subject and object. We perceive that things have certain substantiality. But if we look for an independent I, we will only find emptiness. The people we know are concepts or ideas that we label as someone. This concept is very difficult to overcome while we conceive the world solely from a dualistic perspective. Enlightenment means moving in the world without an ego, being integral parts of totality. Here Prabhuji talks to us about the people. All the people that we know, all the people in our lives are in fact also mental concepts. If we ourselves is a mental concept as we understood, for sure other individuals are ideas in our thinking. So when we love someone, when we are attached to someone, we are in fact attached to a concept. When we reject someone, we are in fact rejecting a concept, an idea in our mind. Moreover, we do not have ability to know any other human being. If we do not know ourselves, of course we cannot know others. What we know about others is how we experience them in our own world, which means we cannot see them purely and objectively as they are, never. As long as we are looking through the glasses of this entity, of this individual, we see what we like in them, which means we like in them. What we do not like in them, which means what we do not like in them. But we don't see them as they are, so we cannot evaluate them objectively and purely. And Prabhuji tells us it's very difficult to transcend this perception as long as we are established in the dualistic view, dualistic perception. We are perceiving ourselves and perceiving others. But that enlightenment, which is the sentence that concludes this paragraph, is when there is movement in this life without an ego and out of awareness to the totality. Totality that we understand from Prabhuji's words, it's transcendental to the dualistic separation that we make constantly because we live in a dualistic perception. We see ourselves existing and we see others. And it's very difficult to see the totality because we look at life through the dualistic lenses. Buddhism denies solidity and substantiality, but not the existence of the universe and the self. By pouring water from a bottle, you will fill it with emptiness. Emptiness is not synonymous with non-existence or absence. Rather, it implies fullness. If we empty ourselves of hatred, we will be filled with peace. If we empty ourselves of words, we will be filled with silence. Prabhuji brings us back to the reassurance that we exist, that we are full, that we are complete, that we are this consciousness, this emptiness, and that we lack nothing. We often think that what separates us from happiness, for freedom, from realization, is actions, is ideas, is regulations maybe, is time, is changes. And Prabhuji tells us just the opposite is the reality. We do not lack anything, but we have too much, too many words. Too much is happening that we need to remove. And then when we remove, Prabhuji says, when we remove the hatred, peace will shine. When we remove the excessive mental activity, peace will be there. When we remove the excess, everything that we are already is here and is full and is complete. We do not lack anything. There is an example that oftentimes Prabhuji gives to the spiritual work, that it's not a work of adding something, but it's a work of a sculpture that removes the excess, and the beautiful statue is already within us, is already there. We don't need to acquire it, but we need to discover it because it's here and it's always existing and it's always us. And in the last words that we are going to read that conclude this article and our journey into this term of shunyata, Prabhuji says a very beautiful sentence that I wanted to pause about, that when we will overcome the contradiction between nothing and everything, we will be awakened to our reality. Currently, in our eyes, in the dualistic perspective, there is a big, big, big contradiction between nothing and everything. But Prabhuji tells us this contradiction can be overcome. To be nothing, in fact, means to be everything. And what I understand from Prabhuji, that it is kind of an invitation to not be afraid to discover that we are nothing, that our actions do not matter so much, that we are not so significant, that we are going to disappear, that this existence is really temporary, is not ultimate, not to be afraid of it, that our ego is not so important, that how others behave to us, it's not the end of the world if it was not pleasant. If other glorifies us, it doesn't add anything to us. To be nothing will allow us to access the fact or the reality that really we are everything by embracing the nothingness. True peace manifests itself with the discovery that the I does not exist. Once the egoic phenomenon is transcended, there is nothing left to defend or promote, and absolute emptiness is experienced. Every effort to achieve is futile. Having overcome the contradiction between everything and nothing, we will awaken to our original nature. By emptying ourselves, we will overflow with plenitude. Jai Prabhuji.